They say home is where the heart is, but nobody mentions what happens when someone tries to turn your backyard into a public playground, especially when that someone is your own homeowners association. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you might think you've heard it all. Trust me, you haven't. This isn't your typical story about paint colors or fence heights. This is about how my HOA decided to install an entire playground on my property and then had the audacity to bill me for its maintenance. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this story gets wilder with each turn and you won't want to miss any updates. It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning in April. I was working from home, enjoying my coffee on the back porch of my house in Oak Ridge Estates, a suburban development I'd called home for the past 5 years. The weather was perfect. One of those spring mornings where everything feels right with the world. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of construction vehicles backing up. At first, I thought they were heading to the community center down the street. Our HOA president, Patricia Thompson, had been talking about renovations for months. But the beeping got louder, and when I walked to my fence to investigate, I saw something that made me choke on my coffee. 3 construction workers were marking boundaries in my backyard. I rushed outside, still in my work-from-home attire, professional. On top, pajama pants on bottom. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on here?" One of the workers, a friendly-looking guy in a yellow hard hat, smiled and pulled out a work order. "HOA-approved playground installation," he said, as casually as if he were delivering a pizza. "Should take about 3 days to complete." I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "There must be a mistake. This is my private property." He shrugged, clearly used to homeowner confusion. Orders came directly from Mrs. Thompson. All the paperwork signed and approved by the HOA board. He handed me a copy of the work order, which indeed had Patricia's flowing signature at the bottom. Now, I should mention that I'm generally a reasonable person. I've lived in HOA communities before, and while they can be frustrating, I understand their purpose. But this was something else entirely. The work order specified plans for a community playground enhancement project that included 2 swing sets, a slide complex, and, I kid you not, a water feature. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Patricia. The call went to voicemail. Of course, I sent an email marked urgent to the HOA board. Then I did what any sane person would do. I asked the workers to stop until we could sort this out. "Sorry, sir," Yellow Hard Hat said, looking genuinely apologetic. "We've got a schedule to keep. Mrs. Thompson was very clear that this project needs to be completed before the community picnic next week." I stood there, watching as they began unloading equipment from their trucks. That's when my neighbor, Barbara Wilson, came power walking past my house. She's in her 70s, but moves faster than most people half her age. She took one look at the scene and made a beeline for my driveway. "Mark," she said, her voice low and urgent, "you need to see this." She pulled out her tablet, showing me the latest HOA newsletter, one I apparently hadn't received. There, in cheerful Comic Sans font, was an announcement. "Exciting news. New community playground installation begins this week." The newsletter went on to detail how the HOA had secured the perfect location for a new playground to enhance community value and provide our children with a safe space to play. What it conveniently failed to mention was that this perfect location was my backyard. But here's where it got really interesting. At the bottom of the newsletter, in font so small I had to squint, was a notice about a special assessment for maintenance costs that would be fairly distributed among adjacent properties. In other words, they were planning to bill me for maintaining a playground I never agreed to have on my property. I was about to call my lawyer when I received an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Urgent, unauthorized construction." Her response was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive HOA communication. "Dear Mr. Anderson, thank you for your concern about the Community Enhancement Project. The board voted unanimously to approve this location for the new playground, as it provides optimal visibility and accessibility for all residents. As a community member, you should be proud to contribute to such a worthwhile project. Regarding maintenance costs, please see attached invoice for your first monthly assessment, $350. Early payment discounts are available. Best regards, Patricia." Thompson President, Oak Ridge Estates HOA. I stared at my screen, momentarily speechless. $350 monthly for a playground I didn't want on land I owned that I never agreed to. Barbara, still standing in my driveway, let out a low whistle. "She's really done it this time," she said, shaking her head. "You? No, last year. She tried to tell me I couldn't have my garden gnome collection because it might attract birds. But this is a whole new level." As I watched the construction workers continue marking my yard, I realized this was just the beginning. I needed to act fast, but I also needed to be smart about it. This wasn't just about stopping a playground installation anymore. This was about protecting my property rights and preventing what felt suspiciously like a power grab disguised as a community project. The construction workers had barely started marking the ground when I decided to take matters into my own hands. While Barbara kept an eye on the workers, I rushed inside to change out of my pajama pants and make some urgent calls. My first call was to Jane Marshall, a property surveyor I'd worked with when I first bought the house. If anyone could help prove this was my land, it would be her. "Mark, haven't heard from you since the closing," Jane said, her voice cheerful. When I explained the situation, her tone changed immediately. "They're doing what?" "No, that's not legal. I still have your property survey on file. Give me an hour." Next, I called Bob Taylor, a retired lawyer who lived 3 doors down. Bob had a reputation for being thorough, and more importantly, he had no love for our HOA after they tried to fine him for having excessive holiday decorations last Christmas. He answered on the first ring. "I'll be right over," he said, not even waiting for me to finish explaining. "And Mark, don't sign anything Patricia or anyone else from the HOA brings you." By the time I got back outside, the scene had changed. Steve Martinez, my next-door neighbor, was standing at the edge of his property with his 2 kids, looking confused. The Sullivan family from across the street had joined the growing crowd of onlookers. Mike Sullivan was trying to keep his 3 excited children from running into the construction zone, while his wife Karen took photos with her phone. "Mark," Steve called out, walking over, "is this really happening? I mean, a playground would be great for the kids, but..." He glanced at the construction workers, lowering his voice. "Isn't this your property?" Before I could answer, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Patricia Thompson stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing her signature pearl necklace and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She walked toward us with the confidence of someone who believed they could never be wrong. "Good morning, everyone," she said brightly, as if she were hosting a neighborhood barbecue rather than orchestrating an unauthorized construction project. "I see you're all excited about our new community enhancement project." I stepped forward, keeping my voice level. "Patricia, we need to talk about this. You can't just install a playground on private property without the owner's consent." She waved her hand dismissively. Mark, this is for the community. The board has already approved it. We've allocated the funds, the equipment. It's ordered and paid for. Besides," she added, her smile turning slightly predatory, "your lot is perfect. It's central, visible, and the terrain is ideal." "But it's my property," I insisted. "I never agreed to this." "Actually," Patricia said, flipping through her clipboard, "when you purchased your home, you signed an agreement giving the HOA certain rights regarding community improvements. Section 7, paragraph 3 clearly states, "That's not quite correct," a new voice interrupted. Bob Taylor had arrived, and he wasn't alone. Linda Chen from the HOA board was with him, looking uncomfortable. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Bob, this is an HOA matter. You're no longer on the board." "No, but I am," Linda spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "And I don't remember voting on this project." Patricia's composure cracked for just a moment. "We voted last month. You were absent." "I was at every meeting last month," Linda replied. "This never came up for a vote." Just then, Jane Marshall's truck pulled up. She jumped out, carrying a rolled-up survey map and what looked like official county documents. "Mark, good thing I still had everything on file. And look what I found when I checked the county records this morning." Patricia's face went slightly pale. "I have a meeting," she announced abruptly, turning to leave. "The workers have their instructions. If anyone interferes with this project, there will be consequences." But Jane was already unrolling the survey map on the hood of my car. "See this line? This is your property boundary, and here," she pulled out another document, "is something interesting."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
3 years ago, the HOA tried to claim this same piece of land for a community garden. The county shut it down then, and they'll shut it down now. The construction workers had stopped what they were doing, clearly unsure how to proceed. The yellow hard hat guy was on his phone, presumably calling his supervisor. Barbara had somehow produced a pitcher of lemonade and was passing out cups to the growing crowd of neighbors. Tom Garcia, the independent contractor who'd helped with my deck last summer, happened to be driving by and stopped to see what was going on. After a quick look at the work order, he let out a low whistle. "These permits aren't even filed correctly," he said, pointing to several discrepancies. "And the drainage plan they've got here, it would flood your basement every time it rains." As the morning wore on, more details emerged. Linda revealed that Patricia had been pushing for this playground for months, but the board had repeatedly rejected it due to cost and liability concerns. The location she'd originally proposed was near the community center, but that would have meant removing her reserved parking space. Susan Cooper, a real estate agent who lived in the community, stopped by and dropped another bombshell. "Property values, my foot," she said, examining the plans. "A playground this close to your house would actually decrease your property value. And these maintenance costs they're trying to charge you, they're 3 times the going rate." By noon, I had a growing stack of evidence. The original property survey, county records showing the previous failed attempt to claim my land, incorrect permits, and documented proof that no official board vote had taken place. Bob Taylor was already drafting a cease and desist letter, and Linda had called for an emergency HOA board meeting. But Patricia wasn't done yet. Just as the construction workers were packing up to leave, having received orders from their company to halt work until the property dispute was resolved, a new email arrived in everyone's inbox. Patricia had called for an emergency community vote to protect our children's future and stand against selfish individuals who would deny our community's growth. Looking at the determined faces of my neighbors, Bob with his legal pad, Linda with her board documents, Barbara organizing what had turned into an impromptu community meeting on her front lawn, I realized this wasn't just about a playground anymore. This was about standing up to someone who had forgotten that leadership means serving the community, not controlling it. As I watched Tom Garcia helping the construction workers fill in the holes they'd already dug in my yard, Susan Cooper approached me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "there's actually a perfect spot for a playground behind the community center. It's already zoned for recreational use, and the old tennis courts haven't been used in years." The pieces were starting to fall into place. but so were the questions. Why had Patricia been so determined to use my property? What was in those board meeting minutes that Linda couldn't seem to find? And who else had been subjected to Patricia's community improvements without their consent? Little did I know, Barbara's meticulous record-keeping of HOA infractions over the past decade was about to blow this whole situation wide open. The playground was just the tip of the iceberg, and tomorrow's emergency board meeting would reveal just how deep Patricia's manipulation of the HOA really went. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. I arrived 20 minutes early, but the parking lot was already packed. Clearly, word had spread beyond just our immediate neighbors. As I walked in, I noticed Patricia's black SUV wasn't in her reserved space, a first in the 5 years I'd lived here. Inside, the usually empty meeting room was buzzing with activity. Barbara had brought her infamous filing box, a massive plastic container she'd labeled HOA Shenanigans in neat block letters. Linda Chen was setting up a projector while Bob Taylor arranged chairs in a semicircle. The Sullivan family was there, Karen still documenting everything on her phone while Mike tried to keep their kids occupied with coloring books. "Mark," Barbara called me over, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she rifled through her files. "You need to see this. Remember that community garden Patricia tried to put on your land 3 years ago? Well, look what I found." She handed me a stack of papers, their corners worn but the text still clear. They were receipts for gardening equipment and supplies, all paid for with HOA funds, dated 2 weeks before the garden project was shut down. "But that's not the interesting part," she continued, pulling out more documents. "See where the equipment was delivered, not to the HOA storage unit, but to 47 Maple Drive. Patricia's house," Linda said, joining us. "And guess what? Those items never appeared in our inventory records, but the money definitely came out of our accounts." The room fell quiet as Patricia walked in, followed by 2 men I'd never seen before. One carried a leather briefcase and had the polished look of an expensive lawyer. The other clutched a thick binder and kept checking his phone. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the room, "I'd like to introduce Mr. James Wheeler, the HOA's legal counsel, and Mr. Derek Foster from Playscape Solutions. They're here to explain why this playground project is not only legal, but essential for our community's growth." Bob Taylor straightened his glasses, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Interesting. When did the board approve hiring outside counsel?" Before Patricia could respond, Steve Martinez stood up. "Actually, I have a question about growth. My property taxes went up last year because of what you called community improvements. But when I checked with the county, they had no record of any improvements in our section. Where exactly did that money go?" The room erupted in murmurs. Susan Cooper, who had been quietly typing on her laptop in the corner, raised her hand. "I think I can answer that. I've been going through our HOA's publicly available financial records. Did you know we've been paying maintenance fees for 3 playground sets for the past 2 years? Funny thing is, we don't have any playgrounds in our community. Yet." Mr. Wheeler cleared his throat, but Linda cut him off. "As current board treasurer, I can explain that. Or rather, I can't explain it, because I've never seen these expenses in our monthly reports. Patricia, would you like to tell us about these phantom playgrounds?" Patricia's composure wavered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding. Those fees were prepayments for future installations, including the current project. Mr. Foster, please show them the plans." Derek Foster stepped forward, opening his binder. "As you can see, the proposed playground is a state-of-the-art facility." He trailed off as Tom Garcia, who had slipped in late and was standing by the door, started laughing. "State-of-the-art?" Tom walked over and looked at the plans. "These are the same cookie-cutter designs you tried to install at Pine Valley Estates last year. the ones that got rejected because they didn't meet safety codes. Mr. Foster's face went red. That was a different situation. Different how? Tom pulled out his phone. Because I'm looking at the permit applications right now. Same design, same company, same inflated costs. Only difference is, over there you tried to put it on protected wetlands. Here, you're trying to put it on private property. Jane Marshall, who had been quietly reviewing documents in the back, stood up. Speaking of property, I've been doing some digging. Patricia, would you like to explain why you tried to rezone Mark's lot as community space last month? The application was rejected, by the way, just like it was rejected 3 years ago for the garden project. The expensive lawyer leaned over to whisper something to Patricia, but she waved him off. Everything I have done has been for this community. The playground would increase property values, provide a safe space for our children, like you provided. A safe space with the community pool. Barbara interrupted, pulling more papers from her box. The pool you convinced us to fund 3 years ago? The one that was supposed to be Olympic-sized, with a diving board. Funny how we paid for premium features, but got a basic pool that's closed half the time for maintenance. Karen Sullivan stood up, her phone held high. Speaking of maintenance, I've been taking pictures of every HOA project for the past year. Would anyone like to see the difference between what we paid for and what we actually got? The room erupted again, this time with neighbors calling out other discrepancies they'd noticed. The professional landscaping that consisted of half-dead shrubs, the security system that never worked, the tennis court resurfacing that somehow cost twice the market rate, but left the courts in worse condition. Through it all, Linda had been quietly setting up her laptop. Now she turned to the room. As current board treasurer, I feel obligated to share something. Yesterday, after our conversation about the playground, I requested an external audit of our HOA accounts. The preliminary findings came in an hour ago. Patricia's face went pale. You had no authority to request an audit without board approval. Actually, Bob Taylor interjected, according to our bylaws, Article 4, Section 7, any board member can request an audit if they suspect financial irregularities. Linda was well within her rights. Linda projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. Over the past 3 years, our HOA has paid for services and equipment that either never materialized or were significantly different from what was approved. The total discrepancy is, she paused, highlighting a number that made several people gasp, just over $487,000. Mr. Wheeler stood up, gathering his papers. This meeting is over. My client has no comment at this time. Oh, I think your client has plenty to explain, said a new voice from the doorway. Officer James Peterson stepped into the room, followed by 2 other police officers. Mrs. Thompson, we'd like to ask you some questions about these financial discrepancies. And Mr. Foster, the department would also like to know about those playground equipment orders that were paid for but never delivered to 3 other communities in the county. As the officers led Patricia and a very nervous-looking Derek Foster out of the room, Barbara turned to me with a satisfied smile. You know, Mark, I always thought having a hobby of documenting HOA violations was a bit excessive. Turns out, sometimes being a nosy neighbor is exactly what a community needs. The room had erupted into chaos again, but this time it was different. Neighbors were comparing notes, sharing stories, and already talking about reforms. Linda was organizing an emergency election for a new HOA president. Bob Taylor was explaining the legal proceedings that would follow. And through it all, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the best communities are built not by expensive playgrounds or fancy amenities, but by neighbors willing to stand together against injustice. Tom Garcia approached me with a grin. You know, if we pool the money, we'll save on those inflated maintenance fees. We could probably build a really nice playground behind the community center. A legitimate one this time. With proper permits? I asked, and without stealing anyone's land, he laughed. Though I have to admit this whole thing turned out to be quite the adventure. As I looked around the room at my neighbors, not just neighbors anymore, but allies who had come together to expose years of corruption, I realized that Patricia had accidentally achieved her stated goal, just not in the way she intended. She had indeed brought the community together, just not quite how she planned. The morning after the emergency meeting, I woke up to the sound of chatter outside my window. A group of neighbors had gathered on my lawn, but this time, instead of construction workers, it was Linda Chen directing a team of volunteers who were filling in the holes left by the aborted playground project. Tom Garcia had brought his landscaping equipment, and the Sullivan kids were helping plant new grass seed. "Hope you don't mind," Linda called out as I stepped onto my porch. "We figured the least we could do was restore your property." Shut. Handed me a coffee. She'd apparently thought of everything. "The police have been busy all night. You wouldn't believe what they found at Patricia's house." According to Linda, when officers executed a search warrant at 47 Maple Drive, they discovered a home office that looked more like a command center. Filing cabinets full of altered documents, spreadsheets detailing various schemes, and most surprisingly, a collection of professional landscaping equipment. The same equipment that had supposedly been purchased for the Phantom Community Garden. 3 years ago, Susan Cooper joined us, carrying a stack of papers. "You know how I've been digging through the real estate records? Well, it turns out Patricia had a side business we didn't know about. She's been buying properties in upcoming development areas, using inside information from HOA meetings about planned improvements to snatch up land before prices rise." Barbara, who was supervising the grass seeding with military precision, waved us over. "That's not even the worst part. Remember all those special assessments for infrastructure improvements? I found records showing she was directing contracts to companies owned by her family members. They'd charge premium rates, do subpar work, and split the difference. David Wright from the city planning office pulled up in his municipal vehicle, looking both amused and concerned. "Folks, we need to talk about your tennis courts." He unrolled a set of blueprints on the hood of his car. "According to these plans that were submitted last year, you should have regulation-sized courts with professional lighting and drainage systems. Mind showing me where those are?" We all walked over to the community center, where our sad excuse for tennis courts lay crumbling. The professional lighting consisted of 2 flickering floodlights, and the only drainage system was a rusty gutter that emptied onto the parking lot. "The city approved funding for half of this project based on these plans," David explained, shaking his head. "Someone pocketed a lot of money here." Steve Martinez, who'd been quiet all morning, suddenly spoke up. "That explains why Patricia was so desperate to get the playground built on Mark's land. The city probably started asking questions about where all that tennis court money went, so she needed a new project to cover her tracks." Officer Peterson arrived with more news. Apparently, Derek Foster from Playscape Solutions had been singing like a canary all night. The playground equipment that was supposed to be installed on my property, it didn't exist. The company was a shell corporation set up to funnel HOA funds through a maze of fake contracts and inflated invoices. But here's the interesting part. Officer Peterson said, flipping through his notepad, "Foster claims Patricia approached him 6 months ago with a very specific request. She needed a project that would look legitimate on paper, but would never actually be completed. Something that could justify large expenditures without delivering any real results." Bob Taylor, who'd been reviewing HOA documents since dawn, looked up from his legal pad. "That tracks with what I'm seeing here. Every time someone started asking questions about missing funds or incomplete projects, Patricia would suddenly announce a new initiative. The community garden, the pool upgrades, the tennis court renovation, they were all smokescreens. Karen Sullivan, who had become our unofficial community photographer, was documenting everything. "I've been creating a before and after record of all our HOA amenities," she explained, showing us her tablet. "Look at this pattern. Every project starts with big promises and fancy renderings, but ends up either half-finished or never started. But the money always got spent." Mike Sullivan, who worked in finance, had been going through the audit reports. The really clever part was how she hid it all in plain sight. She'd mix legitimate expenses with fraudulent ones, bury important details in footnotes, and always have an explanation ready for any discrepancy. Classic signs of long-term financial fraud. As the morning wore on, more neighbors arrived to help with my yard and share their stories. Jane Marshall, armed with her surveying equipment, was helping create an accurate map of community properties. Apparently, several other homeowners had discovered questionable attempts to rezone their land over the years. Tom Garcia, taking a break from lawn repair, shared what he'd learned from his construction industry contacts. Patricia's been running this same game in other communities. She'd get elected to HOA boards, push through expensive projects, skim money off the top, then move on before anyone caught on. We're just the first ones who caught her. By afternoon, my yard was looking better than ever, and the community center was packed with neighbors working together to untangle years of financial deception. Linda had set up a command post in the meeting room, coordinating with forensic accountants and creating a timeline of suspicious projects. "You know what the saddest part is?" Barbara mused, taking a break from organizing her files. "We actually did need some of these improvements. A playground would have been wonderful for the children, but it should have been done properly, with community input and transparent funding." Susan Cooper nodded. "Speaking of which, I've been talking with some legitimate contractors. Once we recover the misappropriated funds, we could actually build a really nice community space behind the center, one that everyone can enjoy without stealing anyone's land or breaking any laws." As the day progressed, it became clear that our community was experiencing something unprecedented. The scandal had broken down barriers between neighbors who had barely spoken before. People who normally just waved politely in passing were now working side by side, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Robert Taylor emerged from his impromptu legal office, a folding table near the vending machines, with news. "The DA's office is taking this very seriously. They're looking at multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, falsifying documents, and it's not just Patricia. They're investigating several board members from other communities who might have been involved in similar schemes." Linda, who had emerged as a natural leader during the crisis, called everyone together for an informal community meeting. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," she announced, "but we also have an opportunity here. We can rebuild our HOA the right way, with transparency and actual community involvement. Who's willing to help?" The response was unanimous. Hands shot up across the room as neighbors volunteered for various committees. Steve Martinez and his tech-savvy teenagers offered to create a transparent online system for tracking HOA expenses. The Sullivans proposed regular community forums for project planning. Even Barbara volunteered to teach others her meticulous documentation methods. "Just in case," she winked. Looking around at my neighbors, now friends, working together to rebuild our community, I realized that Patricia's failed playground scheme had inadvertently built something far more valuable than any swing set or slide. It had built connections, trust, and a shared commitment to doing things the right way. Tom Garcia summed it up perfectly as we finished replanting my lawn. Sometimes you have to tear everything down to its foundation before you can build something better. And sometimes the best community improvements aren't the ones you can see, they're the ones you can feel. The legal proceedings began on a rainy Monday morning at the county courthouse. Officer Peterson had asked several of us to testify about Patricia's activities, and the district attorney's office had assembled a case that went far beyond our community's boundaries. As I sat in the courthouse waiting room with Linda Chen and Barbara, we watched a parade of familiar faces file in. HOA board members from neighboring communities, contractors who'd worked on various phantom projects, and even a few former residents who'd moved away after clashing with Patricia. Mark Anderson, a young assistant district attorney, called my name. She introduced herself as Sarah Reynolds and led me to a conference room where several other attorneys and investigators were reviewing documents. The walls were covered with flowcharts showing the complex web of shell companies and fraudulent contracts Patricia had created. We've uncovered similar patterns in 6 other communities, Sarah explained, spreading out a series of photographs. Each time she'd start with small projects, a garden here, a playground there, then gradually escalate to larger schemes. Your community was actually her most ambitious operation yet. Linda, who'd been invited to join us as the current board treasurer, pulled out her laptop. I've been tracking the money trail, she said, pulling up a series of spreadsheets. Every time she launched a new project, there would be a corresponding purchase of property in an upcoming development area. She was using our HOA fees to fund her real estate speculation. The conference room door opened, and Susan Cooper walked in, carrying a thick folder of real estate records. "You're going to want to see this," she said, laying out a series of property deeds. "Remember that company that was supposed to install our tennis courts? Their corporate address is a vacant lot owned by Patricia's sister. And guess what? They've received contracts from every HOA Patricia's been involved with." "No." Sarah Reynolds leaned forward, studying the documents. "This is exactly what we needed. The pattern shows premeditation and organizational structure. This wasn't just opportunistic fraud, it was a calculated criminal enterprise." As we discussed the case, Bob Taylor arrived with more ammunition. He'd spent the weekend reviewing HOA bylaws from all the communities Patricia had been involved with. She actually rewrote portions of the bylaws in each community to give the HOA president unprecedented authority. Most homeowners never even noticed because she buried the changes in hundreds of pages of mundane updates. Tom Garcia joined us next, bringing testimony from other contractors. She had a whole network of fake companies, he explained. They'd submit competing bids to make everything look legitimate, but they were all controlled by the same people. Real contractors like me couldn't figure out why we never won any HOA projects. Now we know. The district attorney himself stopped by to review the evidence. "This is one of the most sophisticated HOA fraud schemes we've seen," he commented, examining the financial records. "Usually these cases involve simple embezzlement or kickbacks, but this..." He gestured at the wall of flowcharts. "This is organized crime masquerading as community development." As the morning progressed, we heard testimony from other communities. A woman from Pine Valley Estates described how Patricia had pushed through an expensive security system installation that never materialized. A retired couple from Riverside Gardens told a similar story about a community center renovation that consumed their reserves but delivered nothing but a fresh coat of paint. David Wright from City Planning brought in more evidence. "We found discrepancies in every permit application she filed," he explained. "The plans submitted to the city never matched what was actually built, if anything was built at all. She was using our approval process to legitimize her fraud." The most dramatic moment came when Derek Foster was brought in to testify. He looked nothing like the confident salesman who'd tried to start construction in my backyard. Now, faced with serious criminal charges, he was eager to explain how Patricia's scheme worked. She had it down to a science, he admitted, sketching out the process. She'd identify properties that could plausibly support community projects, create elaborate plans that looked good on paper, then use inflated contracts and fake invoices to siphon off the funds. The playground on Mr. Anderson's property was supposed to be her masterpiece, a project so big and complex that no one would notice the missing money. Karen Sullivan, who'd been documenting everything with her camera, showed the prosecutors her photo timeline. "Look at the pattern," she pointed out. Every project followed the same sequence. Big announcements, initial work to make it look legitimate, then mysterious delays and complications that required more money to fix. Mike Sullivan had brought his financial analysis. She was clever. About the timing, he explained. She'd start new projects just as questions about previous ones were emerging. The playground scheme came right when people were starting to ask about the tennis courts. Before that, the tennis courts were announced just as people were complaining about the pool renovations. Jane Marshall contributed her surveying expertise, showing how Patricia had systematically targeted properties throughout the community. She wasn't just choosing convenient locations, Jane explained. She was selecting properties that could be rezoned for commercial use once the improvements were complete. It was a long-term real estate play disguised as community development. The district attorney's team was particularly interested in Barbara's meticulous records. "You've basically done our job for us," Sarah Reynolds commented, reviewing the documentation. "These records show years of systematic fraud with dates, amounts and participants all carefully noted." As the day wore on, more details emerged about the scale of Patricia's operation. The forensic accountants had traced millions of dollars through various shell companies and hidden accounts. The real estate fraud division had uncovered dozens of properties purchased with misappropriated funds. Even the IRS had gotten involved, investigating years of suspicious tax returns. Steve Martinez, who'd been quiet most of the day, suddenly spoke up. "You know what I keep wondering? How many other communities are out there dealing with the same thing? How many other HOAs are being used as personal piggy banks by people like Patricia?" His question sparked a serious discussion among the prosecutors. Sarah Reynolds explained that they were already reaching out to other jurisdictions, sharing information about Patricia's methods and helping other communities identify similar schemes. "The silver lining," Bob Taylor observed, "is that this case is going to set a precedent. It's not just about one corrupt HOA president anymore. It's about protecting communities from systematic fraud. The legal framework we establish here could help homeowners everywhere." Linda Chen nodded in agreement. "And in the meantime, we're rebuilding our HOA the right way. Transparent processes, proper oversight, real community involvement. We're turning this whole experience into something positive." As the legal team prepared to present their case to the grand jury, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The playground that was never built had revealed something far more important: the strength of a community when it stands together against corruption. And while Patricia's grand schemes had crumbled, she had inadvertently helped build something far more valuable: a blueprint for how communities can protect themselves and thrive through transparency, vigilance, and cooperation. The grand jury proceedings brought a new wave of revelations. The courthouse buzzed with activity as witnesses from across the state arrived to testify. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds had assembled a case that went far beyond our community, revealing a pattern of HOA fraud that stretched back over a decade. The morning started with unexpected news when Officer Peterson pulled me aside in the courthouse hallway. "We found something interesting in Patricia's storage unit," he said, showing me photos on his phone. "Looks like your playground equipment actually exists. sort of. The photos showed stacks of rusted playground parts, apparently purchased at auction for pennies on the dollar. She was planning to install this condemned equipment on your property while charging premium rates for new equipment. Susan Cooper arrived with fresh evidence from her real estate investigation. "The rabbit hole goes deeper," she whispered, spreading out property records on a courthouse bench. Patricia wasn't just buying properties near planned improvements. She was actively sabotaging other potential development sites to drive down their value before purchasing them through shell companies. Inside the grand jury room, the story unfolded like a complex thriller. Sarah Reynolds methodically laid out the evidence, starting with my would-be playground and expanding outward to reveal an intricate web of financial manipulation. Linda Chen testified about the hidden accounts she'd discovered, describing how Patricia had created a shadow accounting system that masked the true nature of HOA expenditures. Barbara's testimony proved particularly compelling. Her meticulous records showed how Patricia had gradually increased her control over various HOAs, using each position as a stepping stone to infiltrate more communities. She didn't just take over HOAs, Barbara explained to the grand jury. She transformed them into personal investment vehicles, using other people's money to build her real estate empire. David Wright from City Planning revealed how Patricia had manipulated the permit process. She would submit multiple variations of the same project to different departments, he testified. Each version would have slightly different specifications, making it nearly impossible to track what was actually approved and what was built. The testimony of Derek Foster, now turning state's evidence, painted a picture of sophisticated criminal enterprise. Patricia had a playbook, he revealed. She would identify communities with significant reserves, get elected to the board, then systematically drain their accounts through a series of increasingly complex projects. The playground scam was just the latest evolution of her scheme. Tom Garcia brought in other contractors who had been shut out of HOA projects. Their testimony revealed how Patricia's network of fake companies had monopolized community improvements across multiple jurisdictions. "We could never understand why our bids were always too high," one contractor explained. "Now we know we were competing against companies that never intended to complete the work." The grand jury seemed particularly interested in Jane Marshall's testimony about property manipulation. She presented satellite imagery showing how Patricia had strategically targeted properties that could be rezoned for commercial use. "She wasn't just stealing money," Jane explained. "She was positioning herself to profit from future development opportunities." Mike Sullivan's financial analysis revealed the true scope of the fraud. "We're looking at approximately $7 million diverted from HOA accounts across 7 communities, he testified. But the potential real estate profits from her property manipulation scheme could have been 10 times that amount. The Sullivans' documentation proved invaluable. Karen's photographs and videos created a timeline of deteriorating community amenities, while Mike's financial records showed the corresponding flow of money into Patricia's hidden accounts. Every failed project, every delayed maintenance, every special assessment, it was all part of a calculated plan, Karen testified. Steve Martinez brought evidence from his tech investigation. She used different email addresses and online identities to create the illusion of competition between her shell companies, he explained. She even created fake online reviews and testimonials to make these companies appear legitimate. Bob Taylor's legal expertise helped the grand jury understand how Patricia had manipulated HOA bylaws to facilitate her schemes. She introduced subtle changes that gave HOA presidents unprecedented authority, he testified. Most homeowners never realized they were voting away their rights to oversight and accountability. A forensic accountant named Rachel Wong testified, about the sophisticated money laundering operation she had uncovered. Patricia created a complex network of shell companies and fake invoices, Rachel explained. Money would flow from HOA accounts through multiple entities before finally landing in accounts she controlled. The grand jury also heard from victims in other communities. A retired teacher described losing her savings to special assessments for improvements that never materialized. A young family told how they had been forced to sell their home after Patricia's manipulations led to unsustainable HOA fees. As the proceedings continued, Sarah Reynolds introduced evidence from Patricia's personal devices. Emails and text messages revealed conversations with corrupt contractors, plans for future schemes, and discussions about which communities to target next. She viewed HOAs as nothing more than piggy banks to be broken open, Sarah told the grand jury. Linda Chen's testimony about the emergency HOA board meeting proved crucial. When we confronted her with evidence of financial irregularities, she didn't deny anything, Linda recalled. Instead, she tried to justify her actions as necessary for community improvement. That's when we knew this went beyond simple mismanagement. The most damning testimony came from a former associate of Patricia's who had helped set up the shell companies. She called it community improvement arbitrage, the witness revealed. She would identify struggling HOAs, get elected to the board, push through expensive projects, then profit from both the construction contracts and the resulting property value changes. As the day drew to a close, Sarah Reynolds presented her final piece of evidence, a recording from Patricia's phone. In it, she discussed plans for my playground with Derek Foster, laughing about how they would use substandard equipment while charging premium prices. The homeowners never checked the details, Patricia's voice echoed through the grand jury room. They just want to believe someone is improving their community. The grand jury's reaction was visible even through their practiced neutrality. This wasn't just a case of financial fraud, it was a betrayal of community trust on an unprecedented scale. As we left the courthouse that evening, Bob Taylor summed up what many of us were feeling. This case isn't just about money anymore. It's about protecting communities from those who would exploit them for personal gain. Outside, a group of reporters had gathered, sensing the significance of the proceedings. But the real story wasn't in the headlines or the criminal charges. It was in the way communities across the state were already beginning to examine their own HOAs, asking questions about oversight and accountability that should have been asked long ago. The grand jury would continue hearing evidence for several more days, but one thing was already clear. The failed playground in my backyard had exposed far more than just one person's greed. It had revealed fundamental flaws in how communities govern themselves, and in doing so, had sparked a movement for reform that would reach far beyond our neighborhood's boundaries. The first day of Patricia's criminal trial dawned with unexpected drama. Media vans lined the courthouse steps and reporters clustered around entering witnesses. The case had captured public attention, highlighting vulnerabilities in HOA governance that affected millions of homeowners nationwide. Inside the courtroom, Patricia sat beside her defense team, her pearl necklace conspicuously absent, replaced by a modest sweater set that seemed designed to project humility. Her lawyer, James Wheeler, had been joined by two additional attorneys, suggesting they were preparing for a vigorous defense. The Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds opened with a powerful statement. "This case isn't about a playground that was never built," she began, gesturing to the evidence displays. "It's about trust betrayed, communities exploited, and a sophisticated criminal enterprise disguised as neighborhood improvement." Rachel Wong, the forensic accountant, took the stand first. She walked the jury through a maze of financial records, showing how money flowed from HOA accounts through various shell companies before landing in offshore accounts controlled by Patricia. The level of financial sophistication suggests long-term planning, Rachel testified. These weren't opportunistic thefts. This was a carefully designed system of fraud. A surprise witness emerged when Patricia's former assistant, Emily Martinez, no relation to Steve, came forward. She hadn't appeared during the grand jury proceedings, and her testimony sent ripples through the courtroom. Patricia kept 2 sets of records, Emily revealed, one for the HOA boards and another showing the real transactions. She called it her Community Improvement Cookbook, a step-by-step guide to extracting maximum profit from HOA communities. During cross-examination, Wheeler tried to paint Patricia as a misunderstood visionary. Wasn't it true, he asked Emily, that Mrs. Thompson often spoke about improving property values and community amenities? Emily's response drew gasps. She spoke about it publicly. In private, she called homeowners sheep who would pay whatever. She demanded as long as she promised improvements. The prosecution presented evidence from Patricia's storage unit. The rusted playground equipment found there became a powerful symbol of her schemes. Tom Garcia testified about its condition. This equipment was condemned years ago. Installing it wouldn't just have been fraud, it would have put children's lives at risk. David Wright from City Planning provided crucial testimony about the broader impact of Patricia's actions. Her manipulation of zoning laws and permit processes has created lasting problems for legitimate development projects, he explained. We're still discovering properties that were improperly rezoned through her network of influence. The testimony of HOA victims proved particularly moving. An elderly couple described losing their retirement savings to special assessments for non-existent improvements. A single mother explained how increased HOA fees forced her to take a second job. Each story painted a picture of communities systematically exploited for personal gain. During a lunch break, Linda Chen shared an interesting observation. "Watch Patricia's reaction when financial details are discussed," she whispered. "She's taking notes, but not about her defense. She's tracking numbers, almost like she's still trying to reconcile accounts." The afternoon brought testimony from real estate experts. Susan Cooper presented analysis showing how Patricia's schemes had artificially inflated property values in some areas while deliberately depressing them in others. She was playing a long game, Susan testified. Each HOA project was positioned to maximize her personal real estate investments. A former bank employee testified about suspicious transactions he'd flagged years ago. "We noticed unusual patterns of wire transfers between HOA accounts and construction companies," he explained. "When we questioned it, Mrs. Thompson provided plausible explanations backed by seemingly legitimate documents." The prosecution revealed emails showing how Patricia groomed potential HOA board members. She identified people who would support her initiatives without asking too many questions, Sarah Reynolds explained. She called them her rubber stamp collection. Barbara's methodical records proved invaluable during cross-examination. When Wheeler tried to suggest that homeowners had approved all projects through proper channels, Barbara's documentation showed how Patricia had manipulated meeting minutes and voting records. She would hold votes during holiday periods when many residents were away, Barbara testified. Sometimes she counted absent homeowners as supporting her proposals by default. The technical aspects of Patricia's scheme emerged through Steve Martinez's testimony. He demonstrated how she had used sophisticated software to create multiple versions of project proposals, each tailored to different audiences. The version shown to homeowners included amenities that never appeared in the actual construction. "And plans," he explained. Jane Marshall's surveying expertise revealed another layer of deception. Using satellite imagery and property records, she showed how Patricia had systematically targeted properties for their future development potential. She wasn't just stealing from current homeowners, Jane testified. She was positioning herself to profit from future land use changes. The prosecution introduced evidence of similar schemes in other states. Sarah Reynolds presented documentation, showing how Patricia had refined her methods over time, learning from each community she exploited. This wasn't just a local issue, Sarah emphasized. This was a traveling roadshow of fraud. Wheeler's defense strategy became clear as he cross-examined witnesses. He attempted to portray Patricia as an ambitious community leader whose plans had been misunderstood. "Isn't it possible," he asked repeatedly, "that these were simply well-intentioned projects that faced unfortunate complications?" The jury's reaction to this line of questioning was telling. Several members began taking detailed notes when witnesses described specific financial transactions, suggesting they weren't buying the misunderstood visionary narrative. Officer Peterson provided compelling testimony about the criminal investigation. What began as a simple property dispute revealed a pattern of organized criminal activity, he explained. Each layer we uncovered led to more complex schemes. As the day drew to a close, Sarah Reynolds introduced one final piece of evidence, Patricia's personal diary. In it, she had meticulously documented her strategies for identifying vulnerable communities and exploiting HOA regulations. "Consider this her criminal playbook," Sarah told the jury, "a step-by-step guide to transforming community organizations into personal profit centers." The first day of trial ended with a powerful statement from a former HOA board member who had served with Patricia in another community. "She didn't just steal our money," the witness concluded. "She stole our sense of community, our trust in our neighbors, and our belief in the systems meant to protect us." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around key witnesses, seeking comments on the day's revelations. But the real stories were being shared in quiet conversations among homeowners who had come to watch the proceedings. They exchanged similar experiences, discussed warning signs they had missed, and began planning ways to prevent such exploitation in their own communities. The trial's first day had laid bare not just Patricia's crimes, but deeper issues in how residential communities govern themselves. As people left the courthouse, there was a sense that this case would lead to fundamental changes in HOA oversight and accountability across the country. The defense began their case on a misty morning, with James Wheeler adopting an unexpected strategy. Rather than denying Patricia's actions, he aimed to reframe them as misunderstood attempts at community development. His opening statement painted a picture of a dedicated HOA president caught between ambitious improvement plans and bureaucratic limitations. The courtroom fell silent as Patricia took the stand. Gone was the commanding presence that had intimidated homeowners for years. In her place sat a woman who appeared almost fragile, dressed in muted colors and speaking in carefully measured tones. "Everything I did was meant to improve our communities," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Sometimes progress requires pushing boundaries." Wheeler guided her through a prepared narrative about her vision for community development. She described growing up in a neglected neighborhood and dreaming of building better communities. Her voice grew animated as she detailed plans for parks, playgrounds, and community centers that would bring people together. But Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds was ready. During cross-examination, she produced Patricia's personal notebooks, discovered in a hidden safe at her vacation home. "Let's discuss your actual plans," Sarah suggested, reading from a dog-eared page. "You wrote here, 'Community improvement is the perfect cover. Nobody questions spending when you promise their children a playground.'" Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Those were just brainstorming notes," she protested. "You're taking them out of context." But Sarah continued, revealing entries that detailed methods for manipulating property values and exploiting HOA regulations. The defense called Derek Foster back to the stand, attempting to portray him as the mastermind behind the fraudulent contracts. But under cross-examination, he revealed new details about Patricia's operation. She had a whole system, he explained, producing a previously undiscovered spreadsheet. Each community was ranked by potential profit, with factors like reserve funds and resident engagement determining their vulnerability. Linda Chen's earlier financial analysis proved crucial when Wheeler tried to suggest the missing funds had been earmarked for future projects. She demonstrated how Patricia had created a complex web of fake invoices and shell companies to obscure the money trail. "These weren't future investments," Linda testified. "They were systematic theft disguised as community improvement." Turning point came when Wheeler called Catherine Morris, a real estate developer who had worked with Patricia on several projects. Intended to support the defense's narrative of legitimate business dealings, Catherine instead provided damaging testimony about Patricia's methods. "She approached me about partnering on community developments," Catherine revealed, "but her plans always involved manipulating property values through false improvements. When I refused to participate, she threatened to use her HOA influence to block my legitimate projects." The defense's attempt to portray Patricia as a misunderstood visionary further unraveled when Susan Cooper presented new evidence about property manipulation. "These satellite images show how Patricia strategically degraded community amenities near properties she wanted to acquire," Susan explained. "She would announce improvements, collect funds, then ensure the projects failed, driving down local property values before purchasing through her shell companies." Wheeler tried to redirect attention to Patricia's successful projects, calling in residents from communities where improvements had actually been completed. But this strategy backfired when Tom Garcia demonstrated how these showcase projects were used to deflect attention from larger fraudulent schemes. The completed projects were loss leaders, Tom testified, presenting construction records. She would finish one small project properly, document everything meticulously, then use that success to justify much larger expenditures that disappeared into her network of fake contractors. Barbara's methodical record-keeping proved invaluable. Once again, when Wheeler questioned the timeline of events, she produced meeting minutes showing how Patricia had systematically changed HOA bylaws to consolidate her power. She would propose small changes that seemed harmless individually, Barbara explained, but together they gave her almost unlimited authority over community funds. The defense's expert witness, an urban planning consultant named Marcus Reynolds, attempted to justify Patricia's methods as innovative community development strategies. But under cross-examination by Sarah Reynolds, no relation, he was forced to admit that many of the proposed improvements violated basic safety and zoning regulations. Steve Martinez provided technical evidence that further undermined the defense's position. He had recovered deleted emails showing Patricia's communications with other HOA presidents involved in similar schemes. They called themselves the Community Improvement Network, Steve testified. But their discussions focused entirely on methods for exploiting HOA regulations and hiding financial transactions. Jane Marshall's testimony about property boundaries proved particularly damaging when Wheeler tried to suggest the playground planned for my property was properly approved. Using historical survey data, she demonstrated how Patricia had deliberately misrepresented property lines to justify her projects. The defense's case took another hit when Officer Peterson presented evidence from Patricia's home computer. We found sophisticated financial modeling software, he testified. The models weren't focused on community improvements. They were calculating potential profits from property manipulation and fraudulent contracts. David Wright returned to the stand to address Wheeler's claims about permit applications. He revealed how Patricia had submitted multiple versions of the same projects to different agencies, each with slightly different specifications. This wasn't confusion or bureaucratic error, he explained. It was a deliberate strategy to prevent oversight and hide the true nature of these projects. Mike Sullivan's financial expertise helped unravel Patricia's complex money laundering operations. She created a brilliant but illegal system, he testified. Each fraudulent project generated multiple layers of transactions, making it nearly impossible to track funds without extensive forensic accounting. Karen Sullivan's photographic evidence contradicted Wheeler's attempts to show community improvements. Her systematic documentation of deteriorating amenities and abandoned projects demonstrated the real impact of Patricia's schemes on local communities. As the defense's case continued to crumble, Wheeler made a last-ditch effort to portray Patricia as a victim of circumstance. He called character witnesses who spoke about her community involvement and charitable work. But Sarah Reynolds skillfully demonstrated how these activities had been used to build trust and deflect suspicion. The most devastating blow to the defense came from an unexpected source. Patricia's former personal assistant, Emily Martinez, returned to the stand with new evidence. She had discovered a hidden recording of Patricia coaching other HOA presidents on her methods. "Think of it as community harvesting," Patricia's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Plant the seeds of improvement, cultivate homeowner trust, then harvest the profits." Wheeler's carefully constructed narrative of a dedicated community leader crumbled in the face of mounting evidence. Each witness called by the defense seemed to inadvertently reveal new aspects of Patricia's schemes, adding layers to the prosecution's case rather than supporting her defense. As the day drew to a close, the impact of the testimony was clear. On the faces of the jury, the defense's attempt to reframe Patricia's actions had instead exposed the full scope of her operation, revealing not just local fraud, but a systematic attack on community governance systems nationwide. The jury's deliberation began under intense public scrutiny. While we waited for their decision, new information continued to surface. A group of investigators working with Officer Peterson discovered a hidden storage facility registered to one of Patricia's shell companies. Inside, they found boxes of documents, revealing connections to HOA fraud cases in neighboring states. Sarah Reynolds called an emergency meeting with the homeowners who had testified. We gathered in a conference room at the district attorney's office, where she spread out newly discovered evidence across the large oak table. "These records show Patricia wasn't working alone," she explained, pointing to a series of emails. She was part of a larger network of HOA presidents who shared techniques for exploiting community resources. Linda Chen, who had been analyzing the new financial records, noticed something strange. "Look at these payment patterns," she said, highlighting transactions on her laptop. "Every time Patricia launched a new project in our community, similar projects appeared in HOAs across 3 different states. It was like a coordinated operation." Susan Cooper arrived with real estate records from other communities. "I've been mapping the property purchases," she explained, unrolling a large chart. "These weren't random opportunities. They were targeting specific development corridors years before any public announcements about growth plans." Tom Garcia had been reaching out to his construction industry contacts. Several contractors remember being approached about similar playground projects, he reported. "Always the same pattern. Premium prices for substandard equipment, with the difference being funneled through shell companies." Barbara's meticulous documentation proved invaluable once again. She had created a timeline linking Patricia's activities with similar incidents in other communities. Every time she implemented a new scheme in our neighborhood, it would be replicated elsewhere within months, she explained, showing us her color-coded charts. David Wright from City Planning brought in zoning maps showing how Patricia's network had manipulated property classifications across multiple jurisdictions. They weren't just stealing from HOAs, he explained. They were reshaping entire communities for their own profit. The scope of the conspiracy became clearer when Emily Martinez, Patricia's former assistant, shared more details about the Community Improvement Network. She described regular conference calls where HOA presidents would exchange tips on manipulating bylaws and hiding financial transactions. They called themselves community developers, Emily recalled, but they were more like a crime syndicate. Jane Marshall's surveying expertise revealed another layer of the scheme. She had discovered patterns of strategic property boundary manipulation across multiple communities. They would gradually shift property lines through a series of small amendments, she explained. Over time, they could effectively redraw community maps to their advantage. Steve Martinez had been analyzing the technical aspects of the network's communication. They used encrypted messaging apps and burner phones, he reported, but they got sloppy. I found backup files showing hundreds of conversations about ongoing schemes. The Sullivans continued their documentation efforts. Karen's photographs had inspired other homeowners to share visual evidence of similar projects in their communities. Mike's financial analysis revealed matching patterns of fund misappropriation across different HOAs. Rachel Wong, the forensic accountant, identified a sophisticated money laundering operation that connected multiple HOA fraud cases. They created a rotating system of fake contractors, she explained. Each company would appear legitimate for a few projects, then dissolve and reappear under a new name. Bob Taylor's legal expertise helped us understand how the network had exploited weaknesses in HOA regulations. They found loopholes in state laws, he explained, then shared that knowledge through their network to replicate successful schemes. A breakthrough came when Officer Peterson received a call from law enforcement in a neighboring state. They had arrested another HOA president connected to Patricia's network. During questioning, this new suspect revealed details about their organizational structure and methods. The investigation expanded to include financial crimes units from multiple jurisdictions. They discovered that Patricia's playground scheme was just one small part of a larger operation that had been operating for years. The network had developed a systematic approach to infiltrating HOAs and exploiting their resources. Sarah Reynolds worked with prosecutors from other states to coordinate their responses. This is bigger than one rogue HOA president, she explained. We're looking at organized crime masquerading as community development. As we waited for the jury's decision, more homeowners came forward with similar stories. They described projects that never materialized, mysterious fees and retribution against those who asked too many questions. Each account matched the pattern we had uncovered in our community. The media attention brought scrutiny to HOA regulations nationwide. Journalists began investigating similar cases, uncovering a pattern of abuse that stretched across multiple states. Our case had become a catalyst for examining how residential communities were governed and protected. Linda Chen organized a workshop to help other communities identify warning signs of HOA fraud. She shared the financial red flags that we had missed, teaching homeowners how to protect their interests. Knowledge is our best defense, she explained to a packed room of concerned residents. Susan Cooper created a database of suspicious property, transactions linked to HOA fraud. Her research revealed how the network had used community improvements as cover for large-scale real estate manipulation. They weren't just stealing funds, she explained. They were engineering property values for their own benefit. Tom Garcia worked with legitimate contractors to develop guidelines for identifying fraudulent project proposals. They created a checklist of warning signs based on their experiences with Patricia's network. We want to make it harder for these schemes to succeed, he explained. The jury's deliberation continued as evidence of the network's activities mounted. Each day brought new revelations about the scope of their operation. What had started as a dispute over a playground had exposed a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating in plain sight. David Wright coordinated with planning offices in other jurisdictions to review suspicious zoning changes. They found a pattern of manipulation that had reshaped communities according to the network's investment strategies. They were playing a long game, he explained, showing us maps of affected areas. As we waited for the verdict, our community began implementing new safeguards against fraud. Linda Chen developed a transparent financial reporting system. Barbara created a community oversight committee. Steve Martinez built a secure platform for documenting HOA activities. The case had transformed our understanding of community governance. What started as one homeowner's stand against an unauthorized playground had evolved into a movement for reform. Across the country, communities began examining their own HOA practices, determined not to become the next victims of organized fraud. The courthouse buzzed with tension on verdict day. Homeowners from communities across 3 states packed the gallery, many standing along the walls. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds sat composed at the prosecution table, while James Wheeler fidgeted with his tie beside a stone-faced Patricia. Judge Eleanor Martinez entered the courtroom, her expression unreadable. She had presided over the entire trial with remarkable patience, especially given the complex web of evidence and multiple jurisdiction issues. The jury filed in silently, their faces showing the weight of their deliberations. The 4-person stood holding a single sheet of paper. The charges were read one by one: conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, criminal enterprise, and dozens of counts of financial exploitation. On each count, the word guilty echoed through the courtroom like thunderclaps. Patricia remained motionless as the verdict was read, but her hands gripped the table edge until her knuckles turned white. Wheeler immediately announced their intention to appeal, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the murmur that swept through the gallery. Judge Martinez's sentencing statement was memorable for its clarity and force. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, "you didn't just steal money. You stole people's trust in their neighbors, their faith in community governance, and their belief in the systems meant to protect them. The damage you've done goes far beyond financial loss." The sentence was severe: 25 years in federal prison, millions in restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving in any community organization leadership role. But the judge wasn't finished. She ordered a complete forensic audit of every community Patricia had been involved with, creating a pathway for additional victims to seek compensation. Outside the courthouse, Linda Chen organized an impromptu gathering of homeowners in a nearby park. The mood was a mixture of vindication and determination. "This verdict isn't just about punishment," she explained to the crowd. "It's about rebuilding our communities with real transparency and accountability." Susan Cooper arrived with fresh real estate analysis, showing how property values were already beginning to stabilize now that the fraudulent manipulation had been exposed. "We're seeing a return to natural market patterns," she explained, sharing her data. "Communities can finally grow based on real value, not artificial inflation." Tom Garcia had gathered a group of legitimate contractors to discuss rebuilding projects in affected communities. "We're creating a network of verified professionals," he announced, No more shell companies, no more inflated contracts. Just honest. Work at fair prices. Barbara's documentation methods had already been adopted by several other HOAs. She led a workshop right there in the park, teaching homeowners how to track community decisions and spot warning signs of fraud. Knowledge is power, she reminded everyone, and documented knowledge is protection. David Wright from City Planning shared news about reforms already being implemented. We're revising how we handle HOA project applications, he explained. New verification procedures, better oversight, and direct communication with homeowners. The Sullivans had transformed their photography and financial tracking into a community monitoring system. Karen demonstrated their new app that allowed residents to document and track neighborhood projects in real time. Mike explained the financial transparency features that would make it harder to hide fraudulent transactions. Steve Martinez showcased a secure online platform he'd developed for HOA governance. Everything is recorded, verified, and accessible to all members, he explained. No more secret meetings or hidden decisions. Officer Peterson shared updates about ongoing investigations in other jurisdictions. Patricia's network had crumbled quickly after her conviction, with several other HOA presidents already facing charges. This case broke the dam, he explained. We're seeing similar schemes exposed across the country. Rachel Wong, the forensic accountant, had already begun training other professionals to identify HOA fraud patterns. These schemes succeeded because they exploited blind spots in community oversight, she explained. We're teaching people how to see what they previously missed. Emily Martinez, Patricia's former assistant, had become a valuable resource for investigators. Her insider knowledge helped identify similar operations in other states. They all followed the same playbook, she revealed. Once you know the pattern, it's easier to spot. Jane Marshall's surveying expertise proved crucial for communities, trying to untangle years of property manipulation. She developed a methodology for reviewing and correcting fraudulent boundary changes. We're literally redrawing community maps, she explained, but this time based on truth. Bob Taylor worked with legal experts to draft new HOA regulations. We're closing the loopholes that made these schemes possible, he announced. Future communities will have better protection against this kind of exploitation. The media coverage sparked a national conversation about HOA reform. Journalists interviewed homeowners, experts, and officials, exposing similar vulnerabilities in communities across the country. Our case had become a catalyst for change. Linda Chen organized a committee to oversee the distribution of recovered funds. It's not just about returning money, she explained. It's about restoring faith in community governance. The community center became a hub for reform efforts. Homeowners gathered regularly to share experiences, learn about new protection measures, and rebuild connections that had been strained by years of suspicion. Susan Cooper worked with real estate professionals to develop ethical guidelines for community development. We're creating standards that prioritize genuine improvement over profit, she announced. Tom Garcia led efforts to rebuild damaged community amenities. Legitimate contractors offered discounted services to help affected neighborhoods recover. We're showing what real community improvement looks like, he explained. Barbara's meticulous records became a template for HOA transparency. Her filing system was digitized and shared with communities nationwide. Documentation isn't just about catching wrongdoing, she reminded everyone. It's about preventing it in the first place. As the sun set on verdict day, our community gathered for an impromptu celebration, not of Patricia's conviction, but of the changes it had inspired. Tables appeared laden with potluck dishes, children played on the community center lawn, and neighbors who had barely spoken before found themselves deep in conversation. The playground that was never built on my property had revealed something far more valuable: the power of engaged citizens working together to protect their communities. As I watched my neighbors sharing stories and making plans, I realized that Patricia's schemes had inadvertently created exactly what she had claimed to want: a stronger, more connected community. 6 months after Patricia's conviction, our community hosted the first National HOA Reform Conference. The community center's parking lot overflowed with vehicles bearing license plates from across the country. Inside, the usually quiet building hummed with energy as homeowners, legal experts, and community organizers shared experiences and strategies. Sarah Reynolds delivered the keynote address, describing how a single unauthorized playground project had exposed a nationwide pattern of fraud. This case changed how we think about community governance, she explained to the packed room. It showed us that the systems designed to protect homeowners could be weaponized against them. Linda Chen led a workshop on financial transparency, demonstrating the new oversight system she had developed. Every transaction, every contract, every decision is now visible to all community members, she explained, walking attendees through the digital platform. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The conference attracted unexpected attention from federal regulators. Representatives from housing agencies and financial oversight committees attended sessions, taking notes and asking detailed questions. They seemed particularly interested in Barbara's documentation system, which had already been adopted by communities in 12 states. Susan Cooper presented research showing how property values had stabilized in communities that implemented new transparency measures. When homeowners have real oversight of their HOAs, we see more sustainable growth patterns, she explained, pointing to before and after charts. Artificial manipulation becomes much harder. Tom Garcia organized a panel of contractors and developers to discuss ethical community improvement. We're creating a certification program for HOA projects, he announced. Every step of the process will be independently verified and publicly documented. State legislators attending the conference expressed interest in Jane Marshall's methodology for detecting property manipulation. Fraudulent boundary changes were just the tip of the iceberg, Jane explained, showing mapping software she had developed. We found patterns of systematic land use manipulation designed to benefit private investors at community expense. Steve Martinez unveiled an expanded version of his community monitoring platform. This system now includes artificial intelligence, algorithms that can detect suspicious patterns in HOA activities. He demonstrated, it's like having a digital watchdog protecting every community. David Wright coordinated with planning officials from multiple jurisdictions to create new standards for HOA project approval. We're implementing a 3-tier verification process, he explained. No more rubber stamp approvals or hidden modifications. The Sullivan's documentation app had evolved into a comprehensive community management tool. Karen showed how residents could track project progress in real time, while Mike demonstrated new financial monitoring features. Complete transparency doesn't just prevent fraud, they explained. It builds trust. Rachel Wong conducted sessions on forensic accounting specifically tailored for HOA oversight. We've identified 23 distinct patterns of financial manipulation used in HOA fraud, she revealed. Now we're teaching communities how to spot them before they escalate. Emily Martinez's insights into HOA fraud operations proved invaluable. For developing preventive measures, she worked with investigators to create profiles of suspicious activities that communities could use to identify potential schemes early. These patterns are surprisingly consistent, she noted. Once you know what to look for, they're hard to miss. Bob Taylor presented draft legislation designed to strengthen HOA governance nationwide. We're closing the loopholes that enabled abuse, he explained. These new regulations provide real protection for homeowners while maintaining community autonomy. Officer Peterson shared updates on ongoing investigations sparked by Patricia's case. "We've uncovered similar operations in 27 states," he reported. "This conference is helping us coordinate responses across jurisdictions." The media coverage expanded from local news to national outlets. Journalists interviewed conference attendees, documenting how communities across the country were implementing reforms inspired by our case. The story evolved from a simple fraud investigation to a movement for nationwide change. Linda Chen organized breakout sessions where homeowners could share their experiences and strategies. The stories were remarkably similar. Small irregularities that grew into systematic exploitation, often masked by promises of community improvement. But now these stories had a different ending, with empowered residents taking control of their communities. Susan Cooper worked with real estate professionals to develop new standards for community development projects. "We're creating guidelines that prioritize genuine improvement over quick profits," she explained. "Every project must demonstrate real community benefit." Tom Garcia led discussions about rebuilding community trust through transparent project management. "It's not enough to prevent fraud," he insisted. "We need to show people what legitimate community improvement looks like." Barbara's documentation methods had evolved into a comprehensive system for community oversight. "We're not just tracking decisions," she explained. "We're creating an institutional memory that protects communities from repeating past mistakes." The conference featured innovative technologies designed to support community governance. Steve Martinez demonstrated blockchain systems for tracking HOA funds, while Jane Marshall showed how satellite imaging could monitor property developments. David Wright coordinated with urban planners to develop new approaches to community development. "We're creating models that balance improvement with accountability," he explained. "Every project must serve the actual needs of residents." The Sullivan's monitoring system attracted interest from software developers. "We're expanding the platform to include predictive analytics," Mike explained. "The system will be able to identify potential problems before they become serious." Rachel Wong's forensic accounting workshops were among the most attended sessions. "Financial literacy is community self-defense," she emphasized. "Every homeowner should understand how their HOA manages money." Emily Martinez shared insights about how fraudulent schemes typically evolved. "They start small, testing community resistance," she explained. "That's why early detection and response are crucial." The conference culminated in the formation of a national HOA oversight alliance with representatives from communities across the country. The alliance would serve as a clearinghouse for information, resources, and support for HOAs implementing reforms. As the conference concluded, participants made commitments to implement specific changes in their communities. They shared contact information, formed regional support networks, and planned future meetings to track progress. The energy and determination were palpable as attendees departed, carrying new tools and strategies back to their communities. What had started as a local response to fraud had grown into a national movement for reform, powered by homeowners determined to protect their communities from exploitation. The failed playground that had sparked this transformation was commemorated with a small plaque in our community center. It read simply, "Sometimes the most important improvements are the ones you can't see." For those who knew the story, it served as a reminder that real community strength comes not from amenities or facilities, but from engaged residents working together to protect their shared interests. Winter arrived with unexpected challenges for our reformed HOA community. The first major test came during a severe snowstorm that damaged several community facilities. Under the old system, emergency repairs would have been handled behind closed doors, with residents simply receiving bills for special assessments. Instead, Linda Chen organized an emergency community meeting in the midst of the storm. The community center's backup generator hummed as residents gathered, shaking snow from their coats. Linda presented real-time cost estimates for repairs, while Tom Garcia provided expert analysis of the damage. The transparency was startling. Every dollar would be accounted for, every contractor properly vetted, every decision made in full view of the community. Susan Cooper arrived with market analysis showing how similar weather events had impacted nearby communities. "We have an opportunity here," she explained, spreading out comparative data. "By handling this crisis transparently, we can demonstrate the value of our new management approach." Steve Martinez's monitoring system proved invaluable during the crisis. Residents could track repair progress through their phones, submit maintenance requests, and view real-time updates on emergency fund allocations. "Technology should serve the community, not control it," he reminded everyone. Barbara had already created a crisis response documentation template, ensuring that every decision made during the emergency would be properly recorded and accessible. "Transparency doesn't take a snow day," she quipped, organizing digital files. Even as the wind howled outside, the Sullivans transformed their community app into an emergency coordination tool. Karen's photos documented damage in real time, while Mike's financial tracking showed exactly how emergency funds were being utilized. Residents could see precisely where their money was going and why. David Wright worked with city officials to expedite necessary permits for emergency repairs. "This is how community governance should work," he noted, watching residents collaborate on prioritizing repairs. Everyone involved, everyone informed, everyone committed to the common good. Jane Marshall's expertise proved crucial in assessing structural impacts. Her precise measurements and documentation ensured that repair work would address root causes, not just surface damage. "We're not just fixing problems," she explained. "We're preventing future ones." The emergency response highlighted how much had changed. Instead of hiding information or deflecting questions, community leaders actively sought resident input. Every decision was explained, every expenditure justified, every action documented for future reference. Rachel Wong helped develop a transparent, emergency funding model that protected both community resources and individual homeowners. "Crisis management doesn't mean abandoning accountability," she emphasized, reviewing contingency allocations. The restoration work became a model for future projects. Tom Garcia coordinated with local contractors who embraced the new transparency requirements. Each bid was publicly posted, each change order explained, each timeline updated in real time. Through Steve's system, Linda Chen organized daily briefings where residents could ask questions and raise concerns. The meetings, though brief, ensured everyone understood what was happening and why. "Information flows both ways," she reminded the board. "We learn as much from residents as they learn from us." Susan Cooper documented how the transparent emergency response actually improved property values. "Buyers are starting to recognize the value of well-governed communities," she explained, showing recent sales data. "Trust has real market value." The crisis response caught the attention of neighboring communities still struggling with traditional HOA structures. Barbara found herself hosting impromptu workshops, teaching other neighborhoods how to implement similar transparency measures. "Every challenge is an opportunity to demonstrate better governance," she observed. Steve Martinez's system captured every aspect of the emergency response, creating a detailed record for future reference. "This isn't just about fixing damage," he explained. "It's about building institutional knowledge that serves the community long-term." The Sullivans' documentation proved invaluable for insurance claims and contractor negotiations. Their systematic approach ensured nothing was overlooked and no costs were hidden. Transparency protects everyone, Karen noted, organizing photo evidence. David Wright used the emergency response as a case study for improving city HOA coordination. When communities operate openly, government can be a real partner, not just a regulator, he explained to visiting officials. Jane Marshall's detailed surveys helped prioritize repairs based on structural necessity rather than superficial appearance. Her evidence-based approach prevented waste and ensured resources went where they were most needed. The emergency fund, managed with complete transparency, demonstrated the value of proper financial oversight. Every expenditure was logged, every decision documented, every dollar tracked from allocation to final payment. Rachel Wong developed real-time financial reporting that kept residents informed without overwhelming them with details. Transparency doesn't mean drowning people in data, she explained. It means making information accessible and understandable. The restoration work proceeded with unprecedented efficiency. Without the burden of hidden agendas or secret dealings, contractors could focus on actual repairs. The result was faster, completion at lower costs. Linda Chen ensured that lessons learned during the crisis were incorporated into permanent procedures. Every challenge teaches us something about better governance, she noted, updating community guidelines. Susan Cooper documented how the transparent emergency response strengthened community bonds. Neighbors who had barely spoken before found themselves working together, sharing resources and supporting common goals. The crisis response became a model for other communities facing similar challenges. Visitors from neighboring HOAs came to observe our procedures, often leaving with plans to implement similar reforms. Steve Martinez's monitoring system evolved to include emergency response protocols, ensuring future crises would be handled with the same transparency and efficiency. Technology should adapt to community needs, he explained, demonstrating new features. Barbara's documentation systems proved crucial for grant applications and insurance claims. Her meticulous records demonstrated exactly what had happened, what was done, and why each decision was made. The Sullivans' community engagement tools facilitated unprecedented cooperation between residents and management. Their app became a vital communication channel, ensuring everyone stayed informed and involved. David Wright worked with planning officials to develop new standards for emergency response based on our community's experience. Transparency and efficiency go hand in hand, he noted, reviewing updated procedures. Jane Marshall's technical expertise helped prevent costly mistakes in repair work. Her precise documentation ensured that all restoration work met proper specifications and building codes. The repaired facilities embodied our new approach to community governance. Every improvement was properly documented, every expenditure justified, every decision made with full community awareness and input. Rachel Wong's financial oversight ensured that emergency funds were used effectively while maintaining complete transparency. Her reports showed exactly how community resources were protected and utilized. The crisis response demonstrated that reformed HOA governance could handle real challenges while maintaining transparency and accountability. What could have been a devastating setback became proof that our new systems worked. As spring approached and the last repairs were completed, our community had grown stronger. The emergency had tested our reforms and proved their value. Trust, once broken, was being rebuilt through consistent transparency and genuine collaboration. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more stories about standing up to injustice and communities coming together. Drop a comment below sharing your favorite moment from this journey. I'd love to hear what resonated with you the most.